The Behemoth Brewing Company presents the Department of Conversation with Pat Brittenden. Behemoth, give me something hoppy.
And welcome to the podcast, documentary filmmaker Chris Huriwai. Chris, good morning, kia ora, and welcome to the show, I guess.
Kia ora, morena. Thanks so much for having me, Pat.
Dude, it's a pleasure. I am very excited to speak to you. You're one of our guests we've had on the last little while to do with the New Zealand International Film Festival. You have just released a feature-length documentary. Let's bring up the festival page now, shall we, so people who can see, called Milked. And would it be fair to say it is an expose into the dairy industry, primarily in New Zealand, but obviously it could be taken anywhere in the world, but an expose into the New Zealand dairy industry?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the way that I like to look at it is we're trying to capture a local story. You know, it's a Kiwi film. It's all filmed here in Aotearoa, except for a few kind of images that we've thrown in to display outside external impacts that the dairy industry has had. You know, on, say, for example, we've got links to deforestation for palm kernel expeller and things like that, and we import that as an external source of food for our dairy cows. But besides that, it's all filmed in Aotearoa. It's taking that local kind of small local story, but talking about a global issue. So hopefully it's relatable for people. People always say that they like these small scale, more intimate kind of low budget films. And so hopefully we're able to capture that little charming Aotearoa aspect that everyone usually falls in love with, but relating it to a global issue, telling a global story.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you as well, because obviously you are it's sort of, it looks like it's been made by Amy Taylor, the director.
Amy Taylor.
And but you're I was trying to figure out, this is more of a logistical question. Are you the documentary filmmaker, and you're, I don't want to say employed her, it's the wrong word to use, but have you brought her on board to help you tell the story? Is it her story and you're sort of more thinking about content and producing? How do those roles work out between whose film it is, who's the maker, who's the subject, etc., etc.?
Well, I give full credit to Amy in terms of making this film happen. She's been an absolute amazing lead for this project. But I would definitely say this is a combination of work of the two of us. She is more in the realm of the production, the directing. She was the one man or one lady camera operation crew that came around and did the interviews. But in terms of the story and the script writing, it's very much been a joint venture. The film follows me and my journey coming to understand that dairy isn't the wholesome product that we're all led to believe it is. And so it is all about my story, and it's a bit of a personal one as well. But in terms of the bulk of the work, I have to give it to Amy. She's the filmmaker in this sense. I'm not a filmmaker myself. I make like little social media videos for YouTube and Instagram and things like that. But in terms of the professional filmmaker aspect of the film, I definitely have to give all the credit to Amy.
But when it comes to the Oscar, both of your names would be on it. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I feel bad because obviously I'm the face of the film. I'm going to get so much credit. So any opportunity I have to talk about Amy and how great she is, I will do it. She's been an absolutely incredible leader. It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for her. There are a few times throughout the journey making this film where she's probably sending me email after email trying to get me to communicate something, and I've just been like, oh. So full credit to Amy. This film would not have happened without her.
It did look like quite a long process too. I think I noticed when you were talking to one of the farmers who was moving into pumpkin seeds that the expiration date on one of the bags was October 2019. So have you been doing this for a couple of years?
You got a good eye. I'm interested in to see what else you picked up, if that's the kind of detail you're looking at.
But is that what we saw?
It was a very lengthy, those were not bad pumpkin seeds he was trying to sell. It was a very lengthy process, and as things dragged on, we were worried that some of the footage is going to get quite dated, but it's all still completely relevant. There is one personal story about some of the transitioning dairy farmers. They have since had a lot of barriers come their way, and so if I could change the film a little bit, I'd probably give an update on where they are at. But I think the fact that their solution that is talked about in the film hasn't come to fruition is just an example of how relevant the film is in terms of needing to support these farmers into transitioning, because without it, they're not going to be able to get it done, essentially.
Do you want to explain what that is now? I mean, if you said you want to put an addendum on it, you could do it now and explain what it was. You don't have to, obviously, if it's more of a personal type thing, but you're more than welcome to
No,
as well.
it's not personal. It's not personal. I'm wondering how much to share about the film. You mentioned before that it's being released, but really, in terms of it being publicly, globally available and accessible for everybody, it might still be quite a journey. It is premiering at the New Zealand International Film Festival, but we've only just recently signed on with an international distributor to help us with our global distribution and getting it on the right platform. So
Yep.
I don't want to give too much away,
Yeah.
but all I will say about it is that the solution for the issue is there. It's about legislation not being there to support that solution. And like I say, I think it just backs up the film's point of needing to support dairy farmers.
I'm going to give one thing away, and it's one of the things I enjoyed most of all. The name of the farmer who is in Martin, right? The guy who you talked to, who's in Martin. It might have been the guy who was talking. He was quite a passionate guy, right? I thought, did you have to cast for him to look exactly like Cooch from Footrot Flats? Was that a direct decision? He looks exactly like Cooch from Footrot Flats. And I was thinking,
he's a good guy. He's in and his family as well, incredibly hospitable as well. When we came for that interview, a very genuine guy. One thing that I'm glad about is this film. You know, we didn't have any makeup or costumes or sets or anything, and so I'm hoping it comes across as like a genuine representation of these people, because we definitely didn't cast anyone or dress anybody up or anything like that. I had a haircut. That's about as far as I went. I think I bought a new T-shirt or something, but in terms of appearances, no, we didn't want to go there.
You talked before about, and this is a really minor point, but I did wonder it as we went through. You talked about, now I've written the word down. Is it zoonotic diseases? Is that the name of the disease that jumps from
Zoonotic.
You talked about it there, and you mentioned Ebola, and you mentioned some other things as well. You also mentioned COVID. Was there ever a conversation? Because I guess today there is a bit more of a debate of whether it came from the lab or whether it came from an animal. Has that conversation come up in the last few months about changing that line at all? I'm not suggesting you should have, but I'm just wondering if it was even a conversation in the background at all.
Interesting point. I haven't talked to anyone about that. You know, The last time I heard about COVID coming from a lab, you know, that was in the same period that we were talking about other conspiracy theories that Donald Trump has been throwing around. I'm out of the loop. in terms of where COVID has come from.
Look, let me just say, I think it's pretty well understood now that there are questions now where, as 12 months ago, there was no questions, but I'm not suggesting you should change it. I just wonder if that was ever a comment, because I don't know. I'm not saying
I think, we really just wanted to talk about something that was relevant to the times. Zoonotic diseases that originate in animals and then often mutate and then can move on to humans, is an incredibly large topic that we need to talk about in terms of our food production systems. Whether or not COVID has come from a pangolin or a bat or from the lab is kind of irrelevant in terms of the conversation needing to be had. But yeah, if that is the only thing in the film that you think we should think about changing, then I think we've done.
I'm not actually suggesting you should change it. I was just wondering if you ever had that conversation. Look, I was wondering as well. You're from Northland, and you talk about being on a farm, and I'm wondering how your investigation, whilst maybe not many of them, if any of them, have seen it right now, but how your investigation has been received by maybe some in your personal community, because obviously you'll be surrounded by farmers, you'll be surrounded by dairy farmers as well. Have you had any kind of personal pushback? I imagine there's pushback globally from the industry, but have you had any personal pushback, or how have your local community received what you've been doing with investigation?
I haven't showed the film to a whole lot of people. One thing that I was really excited and interested in was simply hearing your feedback, because I think you're the first probably non-biased person who's seen the film and can give some feedback. So no, but at the same time, I have had support, say, from my local marae who want to do a screening once it's available.
Cool.
And those who have supported me through that process, they've supported me being on the marae to film, helping to promote the film by being involved in interviews and whatnot, and helping to facilitate those interviews. I guess, for most people, your community will have different pockets, right?
Yep.
I assume the dairy farmers in my community of Otawa and Te Taitokero, kia ora, they might not be too hot on the film, because although we do have solutions and we try and be as empathetic as possible to farmers, and we try and pass judgment on the industry and industry leaders who have led them to the current issues that they're now facing. Maybe they're not going to be so hot on the film because it touches on sensitive topics, and it talks about the need to move away from the industry, and change is always difficult for people. But in terms of my community and people who know me, I've always been outspoken about intensive dairy farming, particularly, and improving sources of fresh water for our people, for the environment, and also to, of course, look after animals and the health of human beings as well. And so everyone who knows me, they know that I'm coming from a genuine place, and they know that I use reputable sources and encourage discussion and dialogue. But no, I haven't shown it to the people that you're talking about yet, and I'm anxious to see the response. But if they know me, and of course, if they get through the whole film and are able to see it from a charitable lens, I guess, or a compassionate lens, then hopefully they'll see that we're coming from a space that's looking for solutions for them as well. It's just that these are naturally difficult conversations to have.
Yeah, and look, I'm more than happy to give you my thoughts on the documentary, because for me, it also raises lots of questions, which is, I guess, is what a documentary should do. But I am someone who is not heavily invested in dairy. I don't really drink milk. It's just sort of I'm not a cereal type person. I don't drink coffee. I like cheese. I have quite a bit of cheese. So I am involved.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm not involved. In fact, we'll talk about this later on maybe, but the guys from New Culture excited me a shit ton. But we'll talk about that a bit later on.
Yep.
But I can tell you, here's some feedback for you. I watched it with somebody last night in my house on the big screen. That person this morning chose to use the coconut milk in the fridge, not the dairy, and did some research online as to how much soy milk was at Countdown. So that's one person anecdotally, but that happened in my house last night, that someone's now looking at it going, I mean, for me, like, I've been involved in news media for a very long time. So, I've seen the reports on nitrogen. I've seen the reports on the rivers and how dirty they are, but probably I'm dyslexic, and I do visual imagery better. When you've shown it to me, it's meant something a bit more. So I think it's probably brought some of the stuff that I've heard about, thought about, read about, and brought it refreshed back into sort of my foresight. But I can tell you, you've got a 50% hit rate of someone changing their practice in the first in-house screening in Dunedin.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, hey, 50%, that's pretty good. I'll be happy if it's like a 2-3%, maybe even a 1%. If we get 1% of the globe, let's say, changing some form of their behavior because of this film, then that would feel like an incredible contribution to the issues that we're facing today. And of course, this film is not the end of my journey in terms of an activist and advocating on these issues. This is just one avenue of many that I'll be participating in to try and get the message out. Wow, really awesome, really cool.
So going back to the start of this process for you, you've used the word activist, you've said you're a passionate person, you've said this has always sort of been, what you're about. What I'm interested in the process that you got to, that you went, okay, I'm going to make a documentary. Like, what led you to that process, and why did you decide to make this documentary? Because without doing any spoilers, this is not just a documentary on milk. You talk about the meat industry. There's some scenes in there about the tanning industry. There's some scenes in there about where to from here, about the farming, about agriculture. So yes, it's called Milked, but there is a lot of information in this documentary about other forms in the agriculture sector as well. So why did you start this process, and why did you make this documentary?
There's a lot to unpack in that one. I guess I'll just start by saying it's interesting that you listed off a few different things: tannery, meat, and a few different things that you listed. All of those things are linked with the industrial dairy industry. So for me, the drive to create a documentary based around milk or based around dairy farming is because it was essentially the common denominator that I could find that
Right.
is blowing out into all of these different areas. And when you have such a common denominator, you're able to draw on experts from a range of different places. And so we were able to, of course, dip into that very big pool of mātauranga of knowledge, to have so many different experts contribute to this kaupapa. And yeah, it's turned into a documentary that spans very broadly in terms of issues we're faced with here in Aotearoa. But dairy, we talk about in the film, they're so powerful, so big. Biggest company in Aotearoa is Fonterra. Our socio-economic community, the fabric of society, to a large degree, is influenced by dairy farming here in Aotearoa. So although, yes, it does touch on a lot of things in the film, I would say that at the end of the day, there are at least common threads that draw them in and make it relevant to talk about it in the same package. For me, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time at the skate park making, videos and whatnot, me and my buddies. And so I was familiar with how to use a camera, how to use editing software, and how to use the internet to communicate your message. And so when I started getting into activism and doing advocacy around animal rights issues and environmental issues, me being, I was homeschooled. I don't have any formal education. I don't know how to do a whole lot, to be quite honest, but I knew how to make videos and how to communicate online. And so when I started doing advocacy, that's what I started with. I started with little social media videos. And then eventually I was approached by Amy, our incredible director, and she was keen to do a short piece that we did together. And we vibed with each other. We worked well together. And so we started throwing around the idea of doing a documentary about generally animal agriculture, but from a perspective from Aotearoa and about the situation here in Aotearoa. And as we started gathering information, we started realizing that dairy specifically was the story to tell, because a lot of the experts that we were going towards and a lot of the barriers and issues that we were trying to resolve had dairy at the very center. So it changed from a documentary about animal agriculture in general and shifted specifically to dairy, which we thought was great as well, because there's other documentaries out there, for example, Cowspiracy, which is an American-based film mainly looking at red meat production and consumption. And they didn't touch on dairy. And there is a lot about dairy production, like all things of big industries, a lot of things that happen behind closed doors and that consumers are not aware of. And so we thought, hey, since the story hasn't been told yet, and since Aotearoa is now known for producing dairy products, it's become a part of our identity, you could say, unfortunately. Who better to tell the story, especially because we're so economically reliant on this industry? We call it the backbone of our economy, even though we dispute that in the film. Who better to tell this story, we thought.
Yeah. I have to say, and I'm always careful not to give out spoilers. I think the great thing about your documentary is there is so much information in there. Even one or two little tidbits here and there is going to be insignificant to the vast amount of information people can see. But when one of the things that shocked me that I did not know, and I don't know whether this was because I missed it or it's not general knowledge, and I won't say what exactly the answer is, but when you talked about the emissions that Fonterra has compared to various other entities, I was shocked by that. And I think, especially with a left-wing government who professes to, want to do something with the environment and to, use our quote unquote clean green image, quote unquote, that I was shocking. That was shocking. I mean, there's other shocking literal footage and imagery in your documentary, but that information was shocking to me. about how that's acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, how is it acceptable? It's incredible.
Mm.
I accept and concede. We are a food producing nation. I wish we weren't, but we are a food producing nation, and we have chosen to go down the intensification of dairy production, and with that comes a whole lot of emissions. And our government would have known that that was the case. But yeah, we use this feeding the world narrative to justify it. But yeah, you'll see in the film, it's been put in the too hard basket.
Yeah.
We're cashing in our natural resources, and we don't have an exact alternative for the type of spending that we want to do, for the type of lifestyles that we want to maintain. So it's been put in the too hard basket. But as we talk about in the doco, it's blowing out everywhere, and it's come the time that if we don't address the problem here, like many things, right? If we don't address the problem now, it's going to create bigger problems down the line.
Yeah.
So even in that too hard basket, we've got to start talking about it.
Well, I mean, the thing about the too hard basket, or people talk about putting it up on the too hard shelf, that eventually it has to come off. Whether you want it to come off or come out of the basket, eventually it's going to. So it's all well and good to put it aside for a day, a week, a month, a year, but at some stage, whether you like it or not, it's going to come out. I was going to ask you, as I was watching your documentary, I was reminded of a Michael Moore documentary, Roger and Me. Have you seen the Roger and Me documentary with Michael Moore?
No.
You should have a look at it, because Roger and Me is a documentary that Michael Moore made. It's kind of his first documentary, arguably one of his best, way before Bowling for Columbine and Fahrenheit 9/11 and those things, where he was living in Flint, Michigan, which was the home of one of the big American car brands. I can't remember right now. And Roger was the CEO of of Ford or of Chevrolet or whoever it was. And the documentary is about him trying to get an interview with the CEO, because all these factories are shutting around Detroit and around Michigan, and all his peers, all his people, all his family members are losing their jobs. And so this documentary is called Roger and Me, and it's him chasing this guy down, Roger, and trying to actually get an interview with him. That's pretty much the whole documentary. Although obviously in that documentary, he's giving out information about what's happening on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as I was watching your documentary, I thought, oh, Fonterra is your Roger. That's your person that you're chasing and looking for interviews from and trying to get information out of, that at the start of the documentary are problematic. And we won't talk about what happens at the end of the documentary, because then people can see it. So I would, if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend it. You should check out Roger and Me. It will probably relate to you.
I'm sure it will. Roger, yeah, I've called Fonterra a few other names, but yeah, they're definitely my Roger in the film. We tried numerous ways to interact with them. People will see how that pans out. I got to stop saying that. You'll see it in the film. The story could have been bigger than us just talking to Fonterra. There are other dairy producers in Aotearoa who have similar issues, but Fonterra, unfortunately, had to be the main ones copping it in this one. They deserve it because they are the biggest players.
Yeah, for obvious reasons. Yeah, they're the biggest. So obviously they were going to cop it.
I just have to say, there are others out there as well that I could wave the finger at, but we'll keep it to Fonterra for now.
Well, I mean, there is a beautiful moment in your documentary, and not to spoil it too much, but I will say this as well. When you're talking to a dairy group in Canterbury, and they use the line, that's why we're having this interview, because we're into transparency. And then you ask them several questions, and they basically go, "Yeah, I'm not going to answer that. Yeah, I'm not going to answer that." It's like they've just used the word "we want to be transparent," and then they do everything they can not to be transparent. I was like, to me, that was one of the highlights of the whole documentary, because it was incredibly sad and difficult to watch, because you're like, what are you fuckers doing? But it was also kind of hilarious. It was,
there are a few people that I really feel for in the documentary, because they're having to front these industries, and it's their face, it's them as individuals who are having to front my criticisms, and they're having to either not answer, create bullshit excuses, or look like a fool, because they're not allowed to tell the truth, because of the fact that if they do, they're going to be outing their own industry. And so I just have to say, yes, there are some moments and similar to that one that I think are really good little nuggets, but at the same time, I can't help but feel for the individuals that had to do that and had to front the industry, and now their face is going to be put there, and they're going to be the ones seen as being deceptive and whatnot. But I have to bring it back to the fact that they are representing these huge multinational conglomerates who have so much sway, so much power. Their jobs depend on putting on a good public face. Yes, I would prefer they had jobs in other sectors, but yeah, I like the part you're talking about as well. But as well, I feel for you. I feel for you. I'm sorry.
I was wondering from you as well. What I didn't get a sense of in the documentary, and it's more. See, what I'll probably do is ask you some questions that I think maybe when other people watch the documentary, they might think as well. So it might reveal something about the documentary, but the reality is it's something that I think people, when they see it, they'll be wondering as well. So one of the ones I was wondering is what your personal views are. And I know that you talk about moving away from dairy and moving away from meat. Are you someone who's vegan yourself? Are you like a non-meat eater and a non-dairy? And then I always like to know why people are. And the reason I like to know why is it an ethical thing? Is it something that because you don't want to be a part of big farming? Where do you sit on that for yourself personally?
Yep, vegan. I've been vegan for maybe 5 or 6 years. And I really hope that people are able to look past the individual and see the messaging. We all have our own bias, right? And I clearly have a bias here, being a vegan. But let's have conversations about the facts, the statistics. Let's actually have cordial or meaningful dialogue about the issues we're facing rather than judging the character. But I totally understand people will want to have that information, and I've decided to be transparent ever since the start of the film was released. I've been calling myself an activist, even though a lot of people are like, "Hey, don't do that." But that's just who I am, and that would come out eventually. I've been criticizing Fonterra for a long time. I've got videos on YouTube that people can watch, and so that information was going to come out. But yeah, my motivation behind it, there are so many reasons to advocate for this way of life today. I could rattle off all sorts of rubbish, but the why in terms of my origin was because I would say I was homeschooled. I grew up on a farm where lifestyle block, I would say, very low scale, very small lifestyle block where we had our own animals. And we killed our own animals for consumption. And because I guess I was the youngest in the family, it was always my job to go out and feed the chickens, feed the pigs. I built very, very strong connections with these animals. Being homeschooled and not having a lot of social engagement with other people, the animals were essentially my peers. And so when we came to times when it was time to do a slaughter, to kill an animal, it had a very strong impact on me. And of course, I used to do a lot of like trapping, possum hunting, a lot of shooting and whatnot. And just eventually, throughout my upbringing, I had small pockets, small moments where I would share a moment with an animal. When you're looking into the eyes of an animal and you feel that they're looking back at you, and you feel a sense of connection. Then when it moves on to the times for slaughter, you're faced with some very challenging questions, especially when you have other options to sustain yourself. For me, I've been very, very lucky to always have food on the table and to have supportive parents that have allowed me to experiment with different ways of eating, which I know a lot of people don't have. So, I went vegetarian when I was about the age of 13. I was the only one in my family that went vegetarian. Everyone else just carried on. I went vegan a long time later, probably about 10 years later. I was addicted to cheese, just like everybody else is. Cheese pizza, hot sauce. Oof. I mean, I eat the same thing now, but a vegan version. But yeah, that had me hooked. And I used to make fun of vegans. I'd see vegans, like I remember going to a circus and they had their like, save the elephants. And I just, me being an immature little shit, I was making fun of them, and it's ironic that I would turn into one of them. But I was I don't know how it happened exactly, but little bits of pockets of information come to you. And one day I had a bit of an awakening, I suppose you could say. I was, out on my veranda, looking out into the ngahere, connecting with the universe. And I just had a bit of an epiphany, I guess. I was like, I like being a vegetarian. Why don't I think about taking that a step further, and why don't I start educating myself on the impacts of dairy production, what animals go through for dairy production. And I was eating a lot of eggs at the time as well. So then I started to look into some of the not so nice things about egg production. The information that I found aligned with my ethics. And so then it was an easy decision from there.
So without trying to pigeonhole you, it sounds like, because there seems to be people who make the decision for one of kind of 2 or 3 reasons. One is the ethical issue, which is a huge one. The other is like people just don't like the taste, and so they don't go down that path. I've always, and I'll tell you my journey. I've always sort of been of the opinion that in an ideal world, what I'd like to have in the future, maybe after my kids are finished with school, is like a farmlet up on the Otago coast somewhere, and maybe have my own livestock there to do perhaps what you said your family did. But then I can also see how difficult that would be if you're out hand feeding the cows every day to then have to send them off to slaughter. I get that as well.
Big eyes, those big beady eyes.
Because for me,
their nose.
The difficulty in the whole thing is the factory farming and the cage chickens and that kind of stuff. But I had an experience not too long ago, and I was watching a television program, a documentary program, where they were catching tuna, and they pulled the tuna onto the boat. They put it down and they kind of slit its stomach open, and they, so it was fresh as fresh. And I just had this thought, and I'm not vegan or vegetarian or anything like that, but I just had this thought, imagine a larger sentient being came to Earth and then did that to us. They treated us like we were treating the tuna. And I just kind of went, and that's, you know what, I'm not, don't get me twisted. I'm not putting out there, I'm anything special, but it has caused me to rethink the whole kind of situation. So for me, it's sort of like a sentient being, another creature kind of thing that's got me thinking, as opposed to even more so than the factory farming and that kind of thing as well. But like, as for the factory farming, we do free range eggs and that all we can, although I do know, and I have seen, if anyone hasn't seen it yet, Super Size Me 2, there's that Super Size Me documentary. Super Size Me 2 is on chicken farming and stuff.
He's not dead yet. Wow. He was able to make a second film.
Oh, they do things like they show what barn raised eggs can be, and all they have to do is have like an outside area the size of 20 chickens can get into, and although they've got 10,000 chickens in the barn, as long as they've got a tiny outside area, they can refer to it as whatever the title is. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but that's sort of my journey at the moment, what I'm talking through with these sorts of things. So yeah, it's interesting to hear why people have gone in that direction.
Yes. I mean, I don't know which road we want to take at the moment. I could talk about egg production problems I have there. I mean, if it's a small scale operation, I think the only way to have any ethics around it is to have complete control over every aspect of the production to ensure XYZ is done as ethically as possible. If you're buying free range eggs, it's still going to have issues like, the boys from the industry that don't produce any eggs, they get macerated on day one, chopped up. Blah, 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 blah. They're seen as a waste product, even if it's free range, the best free range system that you could imagine, even the chickens themselves, they'll either go through a mating process with roosters. It can be quite brutal, or they'll artificially inseminate the hens. There's just a whole raft of interesting questions that we've got to ask ourselves. How would we feel about that alien coming down and inseminating us and then stealing our children or our eggs? Really very questionable things. And in terms of what you talked about, possibly getting a little homestead and having a small scale operation, for me myself, I like to respect the animals, and I feel like we have done things like factory farming that have essentially put us on a path or put us on a plane of existence where I don't think we got any right at all to entertain those ideas of taking an animal and using it for our own interests and our own will. We lost the chance of having that type of relationship when we started doing fucked up things like factory farming. But even if you were to do a small scale thing, I'm not trying to say that that you're a bad person or that you shouldn't do that. If that's what you want to do and you are comfortable with doing that, kei te pai, ka pai. But let's talk to our kids about it. Let's be transparent about it. Let's not try and skirt around these hard decisions. Let's be as open and honest about it. And if you can look that animal in the eye and kill it and eat it, kei te pai, you do what you want to do. It's when people hide these things from other people and make up interesting narratives to justify things that I take issue with it. Propaganda from
Yeah.
industry to perpetuate negative things is the issue that I have with something. If you want to do a small scale, like I often say, I don't do it myself and I don't advocate for it, but if you're a hunter and the only meat that you consume comes from animals that you yourself have hunted, that's worlds better than going to the
Yeah.
supermarket and participating in industrialized farming systems. And if everyone in the world ate meat from animals that you hunted, I mean, we'd be eating a vastly reduced amount, to the point where someone like myself probably wouldn't feel the need to stand up and make a lot of noise about it, because the problem would be reduced to a level where I'd probably start talking about something else, to be quite honest.
No, I've heard that. I listen to Joe Rogan a fair bit. Now, people love or hate his politics, but he is a hunter and he hunts elk, and he says that's the only meat he ever eats, and he doesn't participate in that factory farming thing because that's where he gets his meat from. And as I said, not to either pro or con him as a person and a broadcaster, but is
Yeah.
an example of that thing that you talk about. If you eat what you catch, it's a very different scenario than getting something in Clingfill. Although that's being cards on the table, that's currently what I do. I'm not saying I don't do that. So but I also know it's very different. But we're all on a journey as well. Because the other thing is the farmlet idea in general, like the person who was watching the documentary with me last night, who had coconut milk this morning, is now thinking, well, let's be honest, and I really want to talk to you about new culture, but let's be honest, the taste of milk alternatives and stuff like almond milk or soy milk or whatever are very different. And they're thinking they love their coffee. If they were to keep their milk in their coffee, but change the other places they're using it to alternatives, like I like almond milk on cereal when I'm having, because I like the taste of almond milk. Almond milk and coffee changes everything. And it's like that. I'm not saying this person's going to do that, but they're on a journey that's going to start to reduce their use, which may eventually turn into no use at all of dairy milk, if we can call it dairy milk.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give people a pass. You know what I mean? Like someone says to me, I only eat a little bit, and I'm like, okay, well, are you looking for my validation or something? Like, people can do whatever they want to do. I'm more than happy for people to be on whatever journey that they're on. All I want to do is present information, have discussions with people, find ways to talk about these things. I'm not here to tell or judge anyone on what they do. And I do support people saying that they're making incremental changes if they've got quite a big goal. I very much support that. But yeah, definitely not looking to pass judgment on anyone. Absolutely understand that we've got so much stuff on our back these days as members of the society. We've got a range of incredibly difficult things to navigate through on a daily basis. But yes, definitely any change to someone's diet or behavior, if it aligns with their values and ethics, I completely support it and would encourage people to go down that route.
Is there an element of this which is fairly a privileged conversation as well? Like I sometimes think about, and I'm going to stereotype here, which is pretty awful, but the family in South Auckland on a benefit, the family anywhere on a benefit, and we want them to eat as well as they can, and the tray of caged eggs is a good source of protein for them, and it's affordable. Is any part of this a privileged conversation for those that can afford better alternatives, or are we in a space now where those alternatives are available freely at a good price to everybody, and and society is making excuses as to not make the change?
Multiple ways I can go here. There is, of course, issues with healthy food being available, even for meat eaters. The cost of fruit and vegetables is expensive. Even for someone who eats a standard Western diet, access to healthy food is an issue. However, the main privilege that I would say we're talking about here is a privilege of time and education. If this family in West Auckland that you speak of were to sit down with me and we were to go through a meal plan and to have a bit of discussion about nutrition, then I could guarantee you that I will get them on a healthier and more affordable diet than what they're currently eating if they are consuming milk, dairy, eggs, meat. It's just a matter of talking about these things in a way that's helpful for other people, providing resources around cost analysis and the exact nutrition we need. Because people, you talked about protein. Ain't nobody in Aotearoa suffering from a protein deficiency. You know what I
Yep.
mean? It's all this propaganda coming out of people saying you need your protein, meat and milk's good for blah 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 blah. But yeah, no one in a country as privileged as Aotearoa is suffering from a protein deficiency. We might have some people suffering from other forms of deficiencies, but protein is definitely not one of them. To suffer from protein deficiency, you essentially have to be under consuming calories. If you eat a diet that is calorically adequate for your body type, then you're by definition essentially going to be getting enough protein, unless you're just eating table sugar or something. But if you're eating a balanced diet of breads and pastas, beans, legumes, etc., and hitting your caloric benchmark as an individual, then simply by definition, you're going to be getting the protein that you need. And so the cheapest foods out there, the rice, the beans, the corn, the lentils, the pulses, they're the cheapest foods on the market. People just need to know how to cook them, how to make them taste good. If your whānau doesn't like the taste, obviously you're not going to continue, especially if you're having to experiment with new foods all the time. And each time they're like, oh, this is yuck. Then of course it's just going to be easy to go back to that, 24 pack of chicken legs from the factory farm. And for me, for someone who understands the things that are involved in chicken farming, the amount of antibiotics, the harm that animal-based proteins and all these other things can do, the fact that those have become the go-to sources of nutrition for our low socio-economic demographics is a terrible thing. They should be going to the lentils and the chickpeas and the rices and things like that. That's what most impoverished countries live off of. And these impoverished countries are usually hardy, disease-free individuals. It's when we start consuming, and especially over-consuming, on the standardized Western diet that we see a lot of the dietary issues that now a lot of our people are starting to be affected by. Hormonally sensitive cancers like prostate, breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, heart disease. These are symptoms of an entrenched American Western standardized diet. So I really hope having these conversations about moving to more nutritious, cheaper foods.
I thought it was a fascinating point you made in the documentary about Māori, 200 years ago didn't know what dairy was. So that's, I mean, I sometimes think about that when, it was a trend for a while that you should eat the way your DNA teaches you to eat. How many thousands of years did your ancestors eat in a certain way? Like I'm Irish, so that would be a potato diet for me. But I think it's a really good and clear point around milk and how dairy, I guess, in general, but milk and how unimportant it is to our culture and how it's become. I guess we've been told how essential it is, but if you just think about that one point, 200 years ago, Māori didn't know what milk was. It shows how unimportant it actually is. But I was going to say, maybe you found your next documentary. I'm thinking about what's his name, Ramsay, the chef Ramsay. Oh no, it wasn't. It was Jamie Oliver who did those series on school lunches, how he remade family school lunches. Maybe you can do one where you're working with a few families in New Zealand and showing them how to eat properly at a good price and eating better food. Might be documentary number 2, bro.
It could be. So many foods that have become normalized into today's diets were not part of the cultural landscape of Aotearoa pre-colonization. Like chicken and lamb and beef and pork, all of these things introduced foods as well. So are lentils and chickpeas and pulses and stuff. So I don't really take that exact argument of we should be eating what our ancestors ate, because those foods aren't even available anymore.
Yeah, true.
But what we can eat are foods that were similar to them. From the research that I've done, I found that most indigenous people have a very starch-heavy diet. Although they're seen as hunter-gatherers, often the staples that we find, for Māori it was kumara, and it was things like fern root. Those were staples. and we need to return to those staples. Maybe not those exact things, because they may not be available, but things that are similar in terms of their nutritional profile, similar in terms of the type of climate that they can grow in, and similar in terms of the different relationships that that food or that plant has with its environment, with its soil, with its water. There are a lot of similar foods that our ancestors used to consume in large quantities that could be recreated to a degree. We don't have to be eating their exact menu, but what I say is that we should be eating with their intentions rather than the exact foods that they ate. Because if we ate with their intentions, then we would be looking primarily for food that is sustainable for us and our future generations, and something that is sustainable and maintainable for our environment in terms of a food production system.
Is there any research, and this is complete naivety, I'm asking this question, is there any research that points to how Māori treated meat? Like, there was obviously abundance of bird life in New Zealand. Is there any evidence as to what portion of Māori diet before Europeans got here was meat?
No, it's a question that I have as well. All I know is that our primary staple that we could rely on no matter what was the kumara. That's what we could rely on to always be there. Definitely, we've eaten a lot of ika, fish, kaimoana, manu, birds, definitely. But I'm not trying to say or define the ancestral Māori diet, but we live in a changing world, and like I say, not all of these foods and ways of living are accessible for everybody. But the intentions, the values behind those ways of living can be recreated to a degree. When we think about what Māori would have wanted, what my ancestors would have wanted, like I said, they would have wanted a sustainable, healthy food source for future generations, and something that they can continue providing for future generations, and to look after the whenua. Those are values that we can put into our current food system. I'm not trying to say that Māori were vegan, I don't look to the past and take examples and say, oh, hey, that guy does it the way that I like it. Let's copy exactly how he does it. We can draw inspiration from our ancestors and from the past, but we have to also acknowledge that we exist in a changing world, and even things that we participated in way back, they may not be relevant anymore. Tikanga changes, which people need to understand. Ways of living can change, and there's nothing wrong with sharing a bit of kōrero around alternatives. Yeah.
And look, that question was asked really based around just, I was wondering, I wasn't suggesting that we should copy exactly. You said something previously, and I wrote it down as you said it, talking about families, whānau, cooking, and if the family doesn't like the taste, then that's not going to continue on. And I think for me, a lot of the sort of issues is the wrong word, but I guess practicalities around like vegan food and meat and dairy alternatives thus far have been the taste, because I had a girl living in my house. She was a boarder for a while who was doing a mix between kind of vegetarianism and veganism, and she used to joke about the chicken replacement that she had and gave it to me to taste, and it wasn't anything like it, which is fine, and people have different tastes. But what I wanted to say is, when I saw these guys in your documentary, who is run by a Kiwi guy, Matt Gibson, they're called New Culture, and this is cheese. People who are watching, this is cheese that they've made with no cows at all. They use a process of fermentation, and it adds, you'll tell this better than me, but it comes out with the same protein profile as actual dairy. So it tastes, operates, looks, feels literally identical. Is that right?
Yeah. It's so identical. It has similar health issues that I would talk about, in terms of consuming dairy from a cow. This lab-produced precision fermentation way of producing these dairy proteins have the same health implications, negative health implications associated with dairy protein. That's how similar it is. It's literally the same thing. And so I'm not really saying that people should avoid it because it could potentially have deleterious effects on your health. what I'm saying really is that's backing it up. I would say the fact that it is so similar that it's going to have these negative impacts just shows how precise it is in terms of it replicating this product. For me, plant-based alternatives that already exist, which are cheaper to produce and more sustainable than lab-based foods, I would say, they're already available to us, and so I get a little bit frustrated when lab-based foods are presented as a solution, because for me, the alternatives, the solutions are already there. We don't need to spend a further $1 trillion creating this future food system. But I am, of course, happy that such a product exists, because like we say, taste is a big thing for people. Your taste buds change, by the way, but hey, if you're looking for the exact same thing, this is the one for you.
I often talk to people because I help some business and stuff with communication on the side. Well, actually, that's probably where most of my income from. This is sort of on the side. Well, I don't know, whichever way. And I often talk to them about what's the outcome you want in this. Like, what's the outcome you want from what we're doing right now? And sometimes if the outcome is X, even though you want to go hard nuts in a different direction, it's more appropriate and it's better for your outcome that you want to stay a path. And like a good example, let me give you a silly example. If you're dealing with someone difficult and the outcome is you want them to exit from whatever the situation is, sometimes it's good to treat them like they're right, or they have, their complaint is valid even when it's not, because the outcome is you want it to go a certain way. And I wonder with this as well, I hear what you're saying, and I completely concur with you that there are solutions right now. But if the outcome we want, especially from watching your documentary, to bring it back to that, is to impact the dairy industry, it would seem that something like this new innovation, which is, and I think they talked in the documentary about, this is a B2B disruption. This is a business to business disruption, and the consumer can continue on their practices now. That would seem to me to be the perfect solution for the outcome of reducing dairy.
Definitely. But I'm sure you'll have a lot of people listening who will agree that our current modern food production system and distribution is completely broken as it is. So finding ways to perpetuate the same food system has its own problems. But as you say, yes, this will be a business to business disruption. The main commodity that our milk is turned into, for example, is milk powder, which ends up in confectionaries, like dusted on the edges of like seasoned wedges and in chocolates and things like that. And so the consumer has no idea about that process. This is going to be completely business to business. This commodity it will be phased out. It is the easiest dairy protein that is replicatable using this precision fermentation method. It's going to be the first. It's in the firing line as we speak, about being replaced. And so yes, it's great in that sense of getting dairy out of that position and freeing up area and resources for producing other things, because this lab-based alternative will be more sustainable. It'll free up room to think about other alternative ways of producing food, since we will no longer have animal agriculture taking up so much space, which is around, I think, we talk about in the film, 3/4 of land in the world is used for either farming animals directly or for growing food to feed to animals. And so anything we can do to reduce that burden in terms of resources we're using to produce dairy is a great one. But at the same time, inherently broken food system. So I'm really not interested in perpetuating that. But at the same time, it's like, oh geez, that's a whole nother movie, whole nother conversation.
No, but I get that as well, because I heard a conversation with someone the other day about single-use straws, right? And they were talking about how single-use straws was an issue. And I heard the conversation going on between two people, and they were talking about, but now we use paper straws and they're biodegradable. And the person made the point, but they're still single-use straws. I mean, just because they're biodegradable doesn't mean it solves the problem of single-use straws. It's still waste. It's still all the stuff, as opposed to someone, I mean, I haven't done this, but buying a metal straw they carry around with them. So whilst it does help the problem, it's that it is a solution to the problem of plastic straws. It still perpetuates the issues of single-use straws. And I went, that's really interesting, because now you think about it from a different perspective of, Oh, and I sort of hear similar things to what you're saying. Even though it's
Mm.
another solution, it still perpetuates maybe the issue overall, or some of the issues overall.
Yeah, it's we keep finding, I guess you could call it like a silver bullet approach, or a single issue approach to solving a systemic issue. Why do we need straws? Why are you producing the straws in the first place? It's such a
Yeah.
luxury item in the first place. I understand. I've heard from a lot of people, say from the disability community, who talk about straws being incredibly helpful for them. Completely understand that, and hope that route is still accessible for people. But yeah, it's absolutely no reason for us to be producing single-use anything,
Yeah.
and it ties into the conversation of, can we all just move to farming regeneratively, for example? Can we all just buy electric cars? No, we cannot. We cannot just all buy electric cars. We cannot all just farm the animals that we have regeneratively. We need to be consuming less. We need to be producing less. We need to be managing our resources in a way where there's more efficiencies and less waste. So absolutely, if there's a single issue approach to a systemic problem, it's not going to work. And I'm not saying we tackle every issue in existence in the film, but we did try and tie in as many things as we could so that it takes a more holistic approach.
Back to the documentary. A couple of questions about the actual documentary as well. And let's while people are watching, we'll do it in silence. But there's the trailer playing beside us as well. There was a moment in the documentary that you were warned, I think, by the maker of Cowspiracy about the kickback or the pushback you were going to get from making this documentary, including potentially things like death threats and danger sort of thing. And then you said in the documentary something like, I'm going to continue making this documentary. But what I was unclear on is if you had any kind of threats. Have you had any kind of pushback or threats from even suggesting you were going to make this documentary or for making it?
Like I said before, I've been making videos for a while and talking about the dairy industry for a while. And so I've received a bunch of threats working on different projects. And of course, if you know social media and you know YouTube comment sections, you'll understand that people throw around a lot of accusations and say a lot of things. So yes, I'd say I've had all of those things. But primarily, the reason why we included it in the film is to demonstrate that this has happened to a range of other people before. There are, I think, maybe 3 people who talk about themselves as whistleblowers and raising these issues and the kickback that they have experienced. Things like bullets being left in their mailbox,
Yeah, right.
handwritten letters of death threats. And so the idea there was to simply show that whistleblowers have a hard time speaking out. I haven't received death threats in terms of this film, and we didn't mean to make it sound like that I was being, having my life threatened as I was speaking, but simply trying to capture that essence that it is a very difficult place for a whistleblower, and especially here in Aotearoa, we all know the dairy industry. Once this film is public and is released, I will not be surprised at all if there is a target on my back. I just really hope that people watch the film and engage respectfully in a way that we can talk about solutions together. It's definitely going to rub some people up the wrong way, but the whole idea about the film is so that we can generate discussions and start talking about this.
I was thinking as I was watching the documentary, because we were talking about the guys from New Culture and a different way to do dairying, and how actually cows are a very inefficient way of getting the product that we get out of them in the end, and there's better ways of doing it. My mum who's passed used to talk about way back. She grew up with an Irish dad, and our Irish mum and dad, and they didn't have a refrigerator when she was a little kid. They had a safe. That's what they called it, the safe. And the Iceman would come around every week, and he'd put a big chunk of ice in the bottom of the safe, and that would take away basically a week to dissolve, but it would keep the food, it would refrigerate that space and keep the food in there somewhat cold. And the example I always wonder about and talk to people about is what happened to the Iceman when everyone had fridges? And the answer is he either disappeared or he evolved. What happened to the people who developed Kodak film when everyone went digital? Well, they either disappeared or they evolved. And it feels to me, watching your documentary, that dairy farmers, are either going to disappear or they're going to need to evolve. And I'm sure that Kodak example is a really good one, because all those places that was developing Kodak film are now the ones who are printing digital photos. So you can evolve. You don't have to disappear. And I wonder how much pushback there is about the way I'm currently doing things, the money I'm currently making, versus, hey, we need to start to look because it's time to evolve, because if we don't, we will disappear. Do you get a sense of either of those options for people within the dairy industry?
Yep, definitely. The carriage to the car is another example. It's a tricky situation, moving into this time of global disruption around food production and automated systems. It's not just farmers who are having their livelihoods threatened through this coming disruption of automation and whatnot. But it is true, yes, farmers, we have to adapt or we get left behind. It's very simple. And a lot of farmers are already doing that. And it's the ones who are in the best position who, if you act early, that's good. Just like us with COVID, apparently, right? But it's true. If you act early, you're going to come out on top. And it's the ones who are, the richest and the best position who are going to be able to do that. It's our smaller scale, usually family-owned dairy farms who are going to really bear the brunt of this. They're going to have the least opportunity to diversify and to evolve into alternative systems. The family-owned dairy farm model is essentially a myth. If it's not now, it will be in the next 10 years or so, and it's all going to be industrialized. However, Kiwis are known for their innovation, and Aotearoa is known as a food-producing country, and we've got an incredibly good reputation. And so there's definitely avenues for people to move into, but it's not going to be there for everybody for long. There are going to be farmers who are going to have to look for another job, unfortunately, just like everybody else who is facing disruptions. But there's certainly room for alternatives and for alternative exports, and for us to move into different exports and whatnot. But it's not going to be for everybody. Industrialization, automation is coming, and some of our small-scale farmers, unfortunately, are going to have to move on to something else.
Although, and it's interesting because I was thinking last night about, evolving or disappearing. We are literally, as we speak, in a situation where government has mandated that some people are going to lose their jobs because they've changed a rule or a law in society. We're talking about those who won't get vaccines, who are in public sectors, aren't going to be able to work in those jobs. So we currently have a climate where change within legislation is causing people to lose their jobs. And as I was watching your documentary, I was going, this government's already done that. Is this now a good time to talk about these changes in the dairy industry that, yes, may lead to people not being able to do it, but we're actually doing that right now? Why would we then not do it in the next thing to make it to get some of these successes or better for the country that you're talking about?
Yeah, I guess it comes back to that too hard basket. And, there are lobby groups, Dairy NZ, Federated Farmers, who will push back against legislative changes in this direction in terms of looking at alternatives for farmers or funding farmers out of the industry. But yeah, we plucked all that money out of thin air for COVID. And if we do the sums and we look at the economic harm and fiscal problem that this is creating for Aotearoa, it's a no-brainer. It's just that we have incredibly large lobby groups who are entrenched in the status quo, who will try their hardest to keep it there. It's not a matter of us just looking at the facts and saying, "Oh, cool, let's pick that option." There are heavily entrenched entities that will fight to keep the status quo. So how do we get over that barrier? For me, it's about informing the public so that we can all contribute to an informed decision. But it's a long and hard road, that's for sure.
But it has been done before. I think about was probably 10 years ago. And forgive me, the name's jumped out of my head, but you'll know it. It was Cadbury switched to is it palm oil or palm kernel oil, or the one that displaces orangutans?
Yeah, palm oil.
Palm oil. Okay. Likely, so I'm pretty sure it was Cadbury. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone who's watching this, switched to that, and there was a huge uproar, and everyone said they were going to switch to Whittaker's, and it forced Cadbury's hand. They went back It's what they were do. So it has happened. You have seen this happening in this community before. But you know, this is obviously a slightly larger scale, seeing as you say. I mean, I've always thought that tourism was our number one industry, but if it's not tourism, it's dairy being up there as the income earner. Hey, look, I've got one. Oh, so you go. Yep, go for it.
Oh, no, yeah, I was just gonna say, tourism did take over the dairy industry in terms of export earnings for a good little while. And for a while, that was kind of one of the main things I talked about, because it's the dairy industry that's harming all of the aspects that the tourism industry profits from. A clean, green environment, et cetera, et cetera. But with COVID, tourism industry is not looking too hot anymore.
Yeah.
But that's no reason to double down on the dairy industry. Our clean, green environment is good for us as individuals, not just for our tourism market, which people need to hold on to and remember.
I want to ask one more question about a specific question that I wonder if other people watching the documentary will wonder as well. So it's not a giveaway, but it's more of an expansion on. You were talking at one stage in the documentary about bobby calves, which is a horrific thing. I think most people would agree when they see what's going on. But Daniel Ebb, who's the agri-communications specialist in your documentary, it was obvious why some people didn't want to talk about things, but he said, I don't want to really talk or touch on the bobby calf issue. Was that because it was upsetting to him, or was he someone who actually couldn't talk about it because he was a compromise in the work he was doing? Why did he not want to specifically talk about it?
Ooh, I have a lot of respect for Daniel. I think he's doing a lot of great work in terms of analyzing our food systems and looking for solutions. Why he didn't want to continue with his trail of thought there, I can't speak for him, but it's an emotive topic. It's a very sensitive topic, and I feel personally that as he started to continue down that trail of thought, that he was probably going to be giving me more ammunition than he wanted to give me. So I think that's why he stopped with that train of thought, and I think it's quite telling for someone like him, who talks about how we should have transparency and we should be able to accept the darker sides of this industry because it has a greater good that it's contributing to. Very telling that he wasn't able to go into that topic because there are inherent issues around cruelty to animals and human supremacy and speciesism that would have popped up. And so, for me, I was happy that he left it where it is, because I think it's quite telling, the simple fact that he didn't want to get into it.
All right, dude, look, before we go, because I don't like to give out wrong information, I thought I'd do a quick Google search on it.
Oh,
and
nice.
Here it is.
Good
From 2009, Cadbury has bowed to consumer pressure and stopped using palm oil in its dairy milk chocolate. Members of nearly 3,500 Facebook group Take Palm Oil Out of Cadbury chocolate bars were jubilant at this morning's news. So there you go. Just making sure that we put so that public pressure has come to pass before on a smaller scale. Maybe this is the next one.
If people are getting fussy about that, the palm oil industry has a byproduct called palm kernel expeller, which is a food that we import. We import more of that than any other country in the world. It's used as supplementary feed in our dairy herd. And so, it's one of those examples of how we've surpassed our environmental limits locally that we're having to stretch out into other spaces such as Indonesia for palm kernel expeller. So, hey, if you're getting on Cadbury's back about palm kernel or palm oil, then you need to join me and get on the dairy industry's back about palm kernel expeller. Kia ora.
Your documentary, Milks, where is it showing and when? Do you know the exact date? I mean, people can just go to nziff.co.nz and look up Milk to find in their local space. Just the easiest way to do it?
That'll be the best place, because we've already had a rescheduling of the premiere due to some COVID cases in Christchurch. So I won't say any dates here. Just definitely head along to NZIFF. Man, I'm terrible with the name. Head along to New Zealand International Film Festival's website to check out the screening details, because I don't want to give out any information that's going to change because of this damn disruption of COVID.
NZIFF.co.nz, and they've got
that's the one.
A search engine right there. If you can see me, if you're watching us on the screen, and you can just type MILKED, enter, and you will. There it is, right there. Pop up just
there
like
we go.
that. Oh, look, hey, just
Awesome, awesome.
as I see James Cameron's name there, I did want to ask you this, because James Cameron's wife is in this documentary, and I noticed at the end in the credits, I think she's an executive producer, or certainly a producer. James Cameron, arguably one of the greatest filmmakers in the world, certainly one of the most successful. Obviously, he's seen it. How does a filmmaker feel about, you know, Mr. Titanic, Mr. Avatar, watching their little Kiwi documentary?
It's nice, right? I mean, like I say, Amy is more of a filmmaker than me. Maybe if I was more embedded into the film industry, I'd do a bit more swooning. But for me, it's just that, you know, he bought a dairy farm property close to Wellington. He's a part of the landscape here in Aotearoa to a degree. He's part of the movement of encouraging plant-based alternatives, and so I thought, oh, it's inevitable that our paths are going to cross. I foresaw it. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely a big name, and I have to give a mihi out to him as well. He's definitely helped in some aspects of this film. I won't say exactly what, but he has helped us, and very appreciated. And of course, to his amazing wife Susie, who unfortunately is not the talking points, even though she was more involved than James was in terms of helping us with the film. She's never the talking point. Poor old Susie. But Susie, love you so much. Thank you.
I'd love for you to connect us with Susie at some stage. I think she's got an interesting story to tell about what they're doing as well, but we'll talk about that later. Hey, after the NZIFF, is it going to cinemas? Is it going to festivals? Is it going to a streaming platform if people can't get to the festival? Do you know yet?
So our goal is to get it in front of as many people as possible.
Yep.
Some people might say, hey, why don't you just put it on YouTube then? But we're working with a large international distribution agency that's going to help ensure that it gets in front of as many people as possible, which is the priority. Trying to hold on to non-theatrical screening rights so that we can do community screenings and things like that. But at the moment, it's in the hands of our distribution agency. We don't want to put too many limits on them in terms of rights that we keep ourselves, because we want to ensure that they can get the best deal to get this film in front of as many people as possible. But yes, I'm anxious and excited for people to see the film, and I really hope that it is accessible. I would love to make a promise about it being accessible on a certain XY date, but unfortunately that's not where we're at. But I want people to know that I want people to see the film, and so we're going to be advocating as hard as we can to make it accessible as soon as possible. But of course, we're going to be looking for the best deal that's going to get it in front of as many people as possible, so that the message is spread far and wide.
And if people want to find out more about you, Chris Huriwai on Facebook, any other good places to stalk you on?
Instagram, but yeah, probably just the old Facebook and the old Insta.
Good
Give us
place
a
to
like.
Dude, the I as you've probably not that I was trying to be braggadocious or anything, but as you've probably heard, I watch a lot of documentaries. You know, it's something that it's a genre I enjoy a great deal. Very, 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 very much enjoyed yours. Huge congratulations for what you've done.
Thank you.
And as in my little anecdotal story, I've already explained to you how it's made a difference already, and I'm sure it will open eyes around the country, if not the world. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited about this one, what it's going to do, but I'm also excited about seeing what you do next as well. So stay in touch. Well, I want to talk to you about the next documentary as well, whenever that comes out.